One day, I invited my father's African friend to our house. It wasn't something unusual. He had visited us before, always polite, always respectful, someone my father trusted deeply. That evening, however, felt different from the very beginning. The house was unusually quiet. My father had gone out for work, and my mother was visiting relatives. I was alone, sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, feeling a strange mix of boredom and restlessness that I couldn't quite explain. I was 22 at the time. At that age, you feel like you know yourself, but in reality, you're still discovering parts of you that you didn't even know existed. When he arrived, I heard the knock on the door and stood up immediately. As I opened it, I saw him standing there with the same calm expression he always had. He was 40, tall, composed, carrying himself with a quiet confidence that came naturally to him. He greeted me warmly, asking about my father, about the family, his voice steady and reassuring. I invited him inside and offered him tea. As he sat down, the living room felt smaller somehow, like the walls were listening. We talked about simple things at first, weather, work, how busy life had become. He spoke slowly, thoughtfully, choosing his words carefully. I found myself listening more than speaking, drawn to the way he explained things, the way he made even ordinary topics sound meaningful. There was a maturity about him that felt comforting. He didn't rush conversations, didn't check his phone every few seconds like people my age often did. When he spoke, he looked directly at me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel seen. That feeling was unfamiliar. I wasn't used to being truly listened to. As we drank tea, silence occasionally filled the room. It wasn't awkward silence. It was calm, heavy with unspoken thoughts. I noticed small details. The way he held the cup, the slight smile when he laughed softly, the lines on his face that told stories of experience and responsibility. I became aware of the age difference, and with it came an unspoken boundary that I knew should never be crossed. Yet, my mind lingered on thoughts I didn't ask for. I reminded myself who he was, my father's friend, someone who belonged firmly in a world of respect and limits. And yet, there was something about that moment that made time slow down. It felt like two different worlds had briefly overlapped, his world of experience and my world of confusion. At some point, he asked me about my life, not the usual polite questions, but genuine ones. What I wanted to do, what made me happy, what worried me. I answered honestly, surprising even myself. I spoke about feeling lost sometimes, about not fitting neatly into expectations, about the pressure of becoming someone everyone else wanted me to be. He listened without judgment, nodding slightly, as if he understood more than he let on. For the first time in a long while, I felt understood by someone older, someone who didn't dismiss my feelings as youthful confusion. That realization made my chest feel tight. It scared me a little. I didn't want to feel disconnected. I didn't want to feel this safe. The conversation drifted again, lighter this time. He shared stories from his past, from his younger days, about mistakes he had made and lessons he had learned. There was wisdom in his words, but also regret. It made him feel human, not just my father's friend, but a person with depth and emotions. As the evening went on, the sky outside darkened. The call to prayer echoed faintly in the distance, grounding me back into reality. I realized how much time had passed without me noticing. That realization brought a sudden wave of awareness. This wasn't wrong, I told myself. We were just talking. Just two people sharing a conversation. And yet, something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. When he finally stood up to leave, there was a pause. A small one, but noticeable. He thanked me for the tea, for the conversation, and said he would see my father soon. I walked him to the door, my heart beating faster than it should have. As he stepped outside, he turned back briefly, offering a gentle smile that lingered a second longer than necessary. After the door closed, the house felt empty again, but not in the same way as before. The silence now was loud. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, trying to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't excitement exactly. It wasn't guilt either. It was confusion, deep, unsettling confusion. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. My mind replayed fragments of the conversation, his words, his calm presence. I questioned myself, my thoughts, my emotions. I told myself it was nothing, just admiration, just respect. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. A line I didn't even know existed had been approached, though not crossed. And as sleep finally came, one thought stayed with me, heavy and undeniable. That simple invitation had changed something inside me, and whatever was, there was no easy way back to the way things were before. After that evening, I told myself life would return to normal. I expected the memory of our conversation to slowly fade, to blend into the background like so many other moments that seem important only at the time. But instead of fading, it stayed with me. It followed me into my daily routines, into quiet moments when my mind had space to wander. I caught myself thinking about his words, the calm way he listened, the feeling of being understood without having to explain myself too much. A few days later, my father mentioned his name casually at dinner, saying they might meet soon for work. My heart reacted before my mind could stop it. I stayed quiet, pretending to focus on my food, but inside me something stirred. That reaction alarmed me. I questioned it immediately. Why should his name affect me like this? I reminded myself again of who he was and what he represented. This wasn't a story I should even be allowing in my thoughts. Yet, coincidences began to happen. We crossed paths again, once at a local shop, another time when he stopped by briefly to see my father. Each encounter was short, respectful, and harmless on the surface. But beneath that surface, there was a growing awareness between us. Our conversations were still polite, still appropriate, but they carried an unspoken depth that hadn't been there before. He started asking how I was, really asking, not just out of courtesy, but with interest that felt personal. Sometimes it was a simple message passed through my father's phone, sometimes just a few words exchanged when no one else was around. Nothing crossed a line, and yet every interaction felt like it moved us closer to one. Inside me, a quiet struggle began. I found myself questioning parts of my identity I had never allowed space for. Feelings I had buried under expectations and assumptions started to surface. I wondered if this connection was about him specifically, or if it was revealing something deeper about me. That realization scared me more than anything else. At night, when the world went quiet, the questions grew louder. I thought about how society would see this, how my family would react if they ever sensed even a fraction of what I was feeling. The weight of cultural expectations pressed down on me. I knew what was acceptable, what was expected, and what was forbidden. And still, emotions don't always listen to reason. He never said anything inappropriate. In fact, that was what made it harder. His restraint, his respect, only deepened my confusion. There were moments when I felt he understood exactly what I was going through, even without words. A look held a second too long, a pause in conversation that felt heavy with meaning. Those moments lingered far longer than they should have. At the same time, guilt began to creep in. Guilt toward my father, who trusted him. Guilt toward myself for allowing these thoughts to grow. I started pulling back slightly, shortening conversations, avoiding situations where we might be alone. But emotional distance is harder to maintain than physical distance. Even when we weren't speaking, he occupied a space in my mind. One evening, during another brief visit, something shifted. We were alone in the living room for a few minutes while my father stepped out. The silence felt different this time, thicker, heavier. He spoke first, carefully, saying that he hoped I was doing well, that our last conversation had stayed with him. His words were gentle, measured, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I felt my heart race. Part of me wanted to pretend I didn't understand what he meant. Another part wanted honesty, even if it hurt. I responded cautiously, saying that it had stayed with me too. Nothing more, nothing less. That exchange, simple as it was, felt like standing at the edge of something dangerous. In that moment, I became painfully aware of the invisible line between us, an emotional one. We hadn't crossed it, but we were close enough to see what lay on the other side. I could sense his restraint, his effort to remain grounded, and it made me respect him even more. At the same time, it made everything harder. After he left that night, I felt torn. There was a strange comfort in knowing the connection wasn't one-sided, but that comfort was immediately followed by fear. This wasn't a harmless crush. This was an emotional attachment forming in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong person. I started questioning myself more deeply. Was this infatuation? Was it loneliness? Or was it the beginning of understanding a part of myself I had long ignored? I didn't have answers, only uncertainty. And uncertainty, I learned, can be just as powerful as desire. Days passed, and with them came distance. Not because we decided it openly, but because both of us seemed to sense that something needed to change. Conversations became less frequent. The warmth was still there, but muted, controlled. That restraint felt like both a relief and a loss. By the end of that period, I realized something important. Even without physical actions, boundaries can be tested. Emotional closeness can become a form of betrayal, even when intentions are unclear. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't wanted it, but it had happened anyway. And as I stood alone one evening, reflecting on everything, I knew a choice was coming. Either I would step back fully and protect everyone involved, or I would allow this emotional pull to deepen into something that could only end in pain. The calm before that decision felt fragile, like the last quiet moment before a storm. The distance that slowly formed between us felt unnatural at first, like forcing myself to forget a song that had become too familiar. I noticed it in small ways. He stopped coming by as often. When he did, our conversation stayed firmly on the surface. There was kindness, respect, and caution in his tone, as if every word had been carefully weighed before being spoken. I did the same, even though part of me missed the ease we once shared. Silence has a strange way of revealing the truth. In the absence of his presence, I began to understand the weight of what I had been feeling. It wasn't love in the way stories often describe it. It was connection mixed with loneliness, admiration tangled with confusion. And underneath all was guilt, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. I thought about my father often during that time. His trust, his kindness, the respect he had for his friend. The idea that my emotions could, even unintentionally, betray that trust made my chest feel heavy. I realized then that emotional boundaries matter just as much as visible ones. Nothing physical had happened, but something real had still existed, and real things leave marks. I started to take responsibility for my part in it, not by blaming myself harshly, but by being honest with myself. I had allowed a connection to grow because it filled a space inside me that I didn't know how to fill on my own. One evening, I saw him again unexpectedly. It wasn't planned, just a brief encounter. We exchanged polite greetings, and for a moment, it felt like stepping into a familiar room after a long time away. There was warmth, but also clarity. He looked at me with the same calm expression, but this time there was something else there too, acceptance, as if he had already made peace with the situation. We spoke for a few minutes, nothing deep, nothing personal. Yet, in that simplicity, there was closure. No confessions were needed. No explanations were required. The understanding between us was enough. When we parted, it felt final in a way that didn't hurt as much as I had expected. Sometimes endings don't come with drama. They come with quiet relief. After that, life continued. Slowly, the emotional weight began to lift. I turned inward, focusing on understanding myself rather than searching for answers in others. I allowed myself to acknowledge parts of my identity without fear or shame. Not everything needed to be labeled or shared immediately. Some truths are meant to be understood privately before they are spoken aloud. I learned that attraction doesn't always mean action, and connection doesn't always mean destiny. Some people enter our lives to reflect something back to us, not to stay. He had been a mirror, showing me emotions I had never fully recognized before. For that, I felt gratitude rather than regret. In time, I understood the lesson clearly. Emotional honesty begins with oneself. Crossing boundaries doesn't always happen in obvious ways, but restraint can be an act of respect and care. Walking away, even silently, can be a form of love for others and for yourself. Now, when I think back to that period, I don't feel the confusion that once overwhelmed me. I feel calm. What began as a simple invitation became a turning point. not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. And sometimes the choices we make to stop ourselves define us far more than the moments when we give in.